What if I told you that one of Africa's smallest countries just did what continental powerhouses like Nigeria, South Africa and Egypt couldn't dare? Today we are going deep into what might be the most significant diplomatic power play coming out of Africa this decade. I am Asongwe Luis, and for a very long time I have analyzed how nations wield power in ways that rarely make headlines but fundamentally reshape our world. As Namibia celebrated its 35th Independence Day, something unprecedented happened. The country's first female president, Nandi-Ndaitwah, announced the immediate suspension of visa-free entry for American citizens. But here is what makes this truly shocking. This is not just another diplomatic spat. It's a direct response to Trump's sweeping travel restrictions on 22 African nations. And in the next few minutes, I'll reveal to you why this is not just about visas. It's about dignity, it's about economic leverage, and a fundamental shift on how African nations engage with global powers. But first, let me ask you this. When was the last time you saw an African nation successfully challenge American foreign policy? Think about that. The answer might surprise you. To understand the significance of what Namibia just did, we need context.
If you're African, you may soon be banned from coming to the US.
Chad has become the first country in the world to face travel restrictions under President Donald Trump's second term.
It's clearly discriminating.
Now, earlier this year, 22 African countries were targeted when Trump was putting visa restrictions.
US President Donald Trump has an offer for white South Africans. Trump wants to give them refugee status in the US.
Sounds familiar? Now, wait a minute. This selective approach to immigration has historical parallels that many people are not talking about. In the early 20th century, Brazil implemented immigration policies designed to whiten their population, actively encouraging European migration while restricting others.
So in Brazil, there was a concerted effort at the level of government, the federal government, to eliminate and exterminate the Black and indigenous population through whitening, an actual financial investment in the importation of European whites that would produce a new white race in Brazil.
They were about reshaping national identity through demographic engineering. But then, here is where the hypocrisy becomes truly staggering. The Trump administration claims these travel restrictions are about security concerns. But let me show you something that mainstream media won't. In 2023, the United States recorded over 46,000 gun-related deaths. That's 13.7 unalived per 100,000 people.
Where there's a gun, there's an opportunity to kill somebody.
Compare that to most African nations where rates are significantly lower. For example, in Nigeria has 2.7%. A person in Nigeria, for example, is statistically safer from gun violence than someone in the United States. Think about that paradox for a moment. The country that is restricting traveling based on security concerns has one of the highest rates of domestic gun violence in the developed world. Meanwhile, many of the restricted African nations have far lower rates of gun violence. So is this really about security or something else is at play? While official justifications cite security, the pattern speaks volumes. But here's what mainstream media isn't telling you. While African nations receive this treatment, only one responded with direct reciprocity. Not Nigeria with its massive economy, not Egypt with its strategic importance, not South Africa with its diplomatic weight. It was Namibia, a country that is just 35 years into its independence, led by a woman who shattered the glass ceiling in a way that even the United States, after nearly 250 years of independence, has failed to do. Think about that contradiction for a moment. Who really represents the future of democratic leadership? So who is President Nandi, and why does her leadership matter in this context? On the 21st of March 2025, Nandi made history as Namibia's first female president. A veteran diplomat and former deputy prime minister, she brought decades of international relationship experience to her presidency. While many expected diplomatic platitudes, she promised something different. A Namibia that would stand tall on the global stage, demanding respect rather than just aid. But here is what makes this story truly remarkable. Within days of taking office, Nandi made a decision that will likely define her presidency. She didn't just issue a statement condemning Trump's policy. She didn't just summon the American ambassador for a stern conversation. She acted with precise reciprocity. American citizens would face the exact same restrictions that Namibians would face when traveling to the US. What would you do if you were in her place? Would you risk economic consequences to stand up for your nation's dignity? Let me know down in the comments below. In a minute, I will reveal the economic fallout from this decision that experts are worried about. But the real question is whether this marks a new beginning of a new era in African diplomacy. And to understand the new stakes of this diplomatic chess move, we need to look into the diplomatic relationship between Namibia and the United States. Namibia benefits from African Growth and Opportunity Act, or AGOA, which provides duty-free access to over 6,400 Namibian products entering the United States. This includes beef, charcoal, minerals, with Mitsco being the first African company to export beef under this agreement. But here is where it gets interesting. American energy giant Chevron has made important investments in Namibia in the oil and gas sector. This isn't just business, it's a geopolitical positioning in a region that's becoming increasingly important for global energy security. So conventional wisdom would suggest that Namibia has far more to lose in this standoff. After all, the US economy dwarfs Namibia's by a factor of more than 500. But what if I told you that Namibia might be holding cards that are far more powerful than it appears? The truth is, America's strategic interest in maintaining influence in Southern Africa might overweigh the immediate economic leverage. With China and Russia aggressively courting African countries through the BRICS alliance and Belt and Road Initiative, the US can't afford to lose allies in resource-rich regions. But there is another factor that analysts are not talking about. What could happen if other African countries follows Namibia's lead? What if this isn't just one country's response, but the beginning of a coordinated approach to diplomatic reciprocity across the continent? Have you considered how quickly global powers will shift if African nations start negotiating as a bloc of 54 nations rather than negotiating as single nations? Beyond economics and politics, this confrontation reveals something profound about international relations in the 21st century. For decades now, the relationship between African countries and Western powers have been fundamentally asymmetrical. Policies flow one way, with limited ability for African countries to demand reciprocity. When Western nations implement visa restrictions, African countries typically acquiesce. When they impose trade conditions, African nations adapt. This imbalance has been normalized that we barely notice it anymore. But President Nandi's action represents something different altogether. A rejection of this asymmetry and an insistence on diplomatic equality. So you see it, this isn't just about the visas, it's about dignity. In international relations, reciprocity is the foundation of respect. By demanding equal treatment, Namibia is asserting not just its sovereignty, but its dignity as a nation. Now think about this paradox. Namibia is just 35 years old from independence, while the US has made over 250 years after independence, but the US is unable to elect a female president. Which nation is truly embodying democratic progress? The question answers itself. But let me ask you something even more challenging. What if the true test of democracy isn't just free elections, but the courage to stand up to more powerful nations when treated unfairly? In a moment, I will share what I believe would happen next in this diplomatic standoff and why it might forever change the way African nations engage with the West. So, what happens next in this high-stakes diplomatic confrontation? First, expect carefully worded diplomatic statements from Washington expressing concern while attempting to downplay the significance of Namibia's decision. Second, watch for behind-the-scenes pressure applied through business channels and diplomatic back channels. Third, pay attention on how African nations respond. Will they publicly support Namibia? Would other countries follow with similar measures? But then, here is my boldest prediction. This confrontation will ultimately strengthen Namibia rather than weaken it. Why? Because it establishes President Nandi as a leader willing to take calculated risk to protect her nation's interests and dignity. In the court of international public opinion, David versus Goliath narratives resonate powerfully. Namibia has just positioned itself as an African country unwilling to accept double standards, and that message would resonate far beyond its borders. But the most significant outcome might be what this means for African diplomatic unity. For years, organizations like the African Union have struggled to present a unified approach to international relations. Could Namibia's action be the catalyst that finally changes this? What if this is the beginning of a new era where African nations coordinate their response to unfair treatment by global powers? The implications would be profound, not just for Africa, but for the entire global order. As we wrap up with today's analysis, I want to leave you with a thought that goes beyond politics and economics. Leadership is ultimately about courage, the willingness to make a stance even when the risks are so clear. In this case, what we are witnessing in Namibia is a masterclass in principled leadership. For far too long, the narrative around Africa has been dominated by aid, dependency, and intervention. But what if the future is about reciprocity, respect, and mutual understanding? If you found this analysis valuable, hit that subscribe button and also press the join button so that you can join our community of strategic thinkers where we see beyond the headlines to understand the forces shaping our world. My name is Asawa Luis for the Strategic Lens, helping you see the world as it really is, not the way others want you to see it. Stay sharp, stay curious, and we will see you in the next analysis. Ciao.